In the last lesson, I showed you how I made reproductions of my work. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how I add color in Photoshop. One of the first things I do when I'm going to add color to my comic is I look at the image, I look at the mode, and I did scan this as a bitmap, but I had converted it to CMYK. You just want to make sure that when you're working in color, that you have it, especially when you're working for print, you want your file to be CMYK and not RGB or grayscale. RGB is meant for the internet, for monitors, and for projection, and CMYK is meant for print. We're going to go over here to our layers. I would like to rename background. I'm going to double click on background. I'm going to name this line art because that is the only thing that's going to be on that layer. I'm going to say okay, and then I set it to multiply because I'm going to color underneath it. Line art is going to be locked. I want to lock it because I don't want to mess with it. It is, for me, one of the most precious things, having my line art be crisp and clear. Underneath it, I'm going to start a new layer. I will think about my color as foreground and background, so then I can do more sweeping like color decisions without having to be too precious about anything. I'm going to make one that says background color, and then I'm going to make one more that's foreground color. One of the things that I would say about color is if you feel unsure about color, I would pick up a little bit of painting, maybe try watercolor or acrylic. The more and more you start using color, the better you get at using it. Another tip, if you don't want to go that route, if you just want to have a satisfying color palette, one of the things that I would suggest is looking for a color palette that already exists. So you can grab an image of a favorite painting that you really like the colors of, and then you can sample colors from that painting. I feel pretty confident with my choices of colors, so I am just going to color how I feel comfortable. I am going to decide to color in this panel here. I'm going to work first in background just to kind of establish what I would like the colors to be. I'm going to use the color picker instead of a palette. One of the things when I'm choosing a color is that I usually just try to keep K down to 0. If you add black to your color, it's going to get muddy. A better way is just to have your color made up of C, M, and Y, and let your black, the K in your comic, just exist in your line art. I really like this blue a lot, actually, so I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to color in my sky with this color. When I'm coloring in Photoshop, I usually use the pencil tool because it has a hard edge that is more reminiscent of my line art. I'm going to block in this color here. If you want to go quickly, you can just hold Shift down and click, and then add it in a line. And then I can use my paint bucket tool. I'm going to dump the color in there, and that looks great. I kind of see the ground in the junkyard as being sort of a dirty gray color, maybe slightly brown. I do picture it sort of warm in the oranges, maybe like this, maybe a little bit more magenta. I'm just going to block in the ground color. And again, I'm going to use the paint bucket tool, just dump it in there. That is the background. And now everything else, I sort of consider it being in the foreground, even the birds in the sky. I am going to try to keep this pretty simple. I'm going to start with the foreground now. So I'm going to go back to my foreground layer, and I'm going to choose a color for King. So he's a Rottweiler mix. The sort of reddish color on a Rottweiler is a little bit like that. And again, I'm going to take K out of it. I'm just going to use the pencil tool, and I'm going to pencil it in like that. That looks nice to me. I kind of picture the car that he's sitting on as being a burgundy car. I'm going to choose a burgundy color. And again, I don't like having K in my color. It's more of a salmon, I guess. I'm going to add a little bit more cyan, maybe a lot more. I like that better. So I'm just going to use my Shift key and break in that car. I'm going to color right through the sandhill crane, actually, just to keep it simple. And I'm just coloring with a mouse, but if you're going to do a lot of coloring on Photoshop, I would recommend having a tablet. It's a good thing to have. I'm going to keep dumping color. This truck over here, kind of pictured as a dirty green color. So I'm going to go to greens. My greens, again, I want to get my K out of there. Green is a tricky color. If you want your greens not to look too vibrant, magenta is a good thing to add. I'm going to add 10% more magenta. We already like it better. Yeah, I like that better already. Again, I'm going to use my trick of just using the shift key to break the color in. There are some details that I might add, like the headlight. Maybe I'll make that a different color. But I've come to learn that I don't like colors being too complicated. I think keeping your colors simple is a really good idea. And then we have one more car back here. I'm going to go down my yellows. I'm going to keep cyan out of my yellow. I'm going to put some magenta into my yellow. I'm a fan of the school bus yellow. Yeah, I like that yellow. And I'm going to break in this car here. The thing that's nice about working with layers of having a background and a foreground is that when you mess up, like I just did here with my foreground, I can just use the eraser tool, but I'm going to let this be a little sloppy. I have the sandhill cranes last that I want to color, and I would like to color them all the color of a sandhill crane, which is like a dusty brown, but I want it to pop from the ground like this. Again, I do not want any K. I'm going to color in the sandhill cranes. And I'm keeping my colors really simple. I'm actually not too much of a fan of overcoloring. I think you can get away with really doing minimal amounts of coloring. If you continuously go around the perimeter of your objects like this, and you are consistent with it, you can then use the bucket tool and fill it in. Just know that sometimes you'll think you did it. You'll think that you went around the object and you will figure out that you did not. And then you will spend more than a couple minutes trying to figure out where you didn't continue that line. And I know that not all of the body is the same color, but again, I'm trying to keep my colors pretty simple. Just like with ink, if you want something to pop, you want it to have contrast with the image below it. When you're working with just black and white, black is the opposite of white, so having black in front of white really makes things pop, and also having white in front of black makes things pop, so vice versa, just like a checkerboard. But when you're working with color, it is slightly more nuanced, but I believe the principles are sort of the same. So you can have colors that are unlike each other, or lighter than each other. There's lots of ways of mixing it up. So I think that I filled that in correctly. There I did. And I'm just going to make their legs the same color because for the amount of detail in my drawing, I think really being detailed with color would be unappealing to look at for me. I do like the idea of the colors being a little rough and pretty simple. That looks nice to me. And because these sandhill cranes are in the distance, I might just make the color slightly darker for them. I think it'll look nice against that blue. If it doesn't, I will change my mind. That's another beautiful thing about working in layers is that I can just infinitely change my mind. If you work with color on your actual line art layer and you change your mind, your line art will slowly get chewed away. I want to emphasize to not color on your line art. Your line art is precious. Leave it alone. I like the way that it's looking, but I'm going to just add a couple of details. I want maybe the headlight here to be like a lemon yellow. Let's do a little bit of a lemon yellow. That looks nice. So I'll change the headlight here in the foreground. I'll just use the same color for this headlight. The smashed windshield of this car, I'm gonna add a slate blue. I'm using my pencil tool. If you are a person who's gonna use Photoshop, I do highly recommend getting used to using your key commands it's easy just to press the letter on the keyboard instead of searching for something on the side. I'm liking the way that's looking. I'm just going to add a couple more things. I'm going to add a little bit of a puddle here. Reusing colors is a really good idea. It makes your palette more sophisticated. I'm going to add some details in this puddle here. The grass, I am not going to color it green. Just too many details are unnecessary. Unless it does something for the image, I don't want to go down that path. Just to get a little bit of a three-dimensional quality here, I'm going to color a couple places behind the grass. With the same blue, I'm going to choose a slightly lighter version. Maybe even lighter than that. That looks nice, I think. I'm going to color in this cloud here. So it's pretty too similar. Even though it is different, it's too similar to the already existing sky. But I'm just going to finish coloring this in, see how it looks. Maybe when it's all filled in, it'll look nice. It's subtle, and if it needs to be lighter, I'll choose to be lighter. But against that sandhill crane, it looks pretty nice, actually. I like that. Maybe I'll just choose a slightly lighter blue. Let's see. Barely different, but it works. If this is your type of thing that you're looking to do, work the rest of the comic in that same way. And then when you're done, before you flatten it, go to File and Save As. Save it as a PSD, so I already have it saved as a PSD. PSD is really good for working with images that have multiple layers, so I'm going to say Save. I'm going to replace it. The foreground is separate, the background is separate. Together they look nice, but if I wanted to change, for example, the ground, I wanted to make it a different color, at this point I could choose a color and dump it in there and it would look fine. But say I like everything, say I finished everything, what I would do then is make sure you flatten it. So flatten image, and then go to File, Save As, save it on the computer, and then we're going to change this into a TIFF file. So that's going to be a much smaller file size. We're going to save it. I usually do LZW. I have a friend who told me that it's fine and it makes the file size smaller. And I say, okay, and there you have it. Print it exactly how you would print it in black and white, but just on a printer that is capable of printing color. Now that I've shown you how to add color in Photoshop, in the next lesson I'm going to share with you some of my personal recommendations.